Should you use a cavity back iron or a blade to improve your game? Today, we're going to debunk that myth. Let's get stuck into this video and find out. Before we get stuck into these two irons, guys, I'm Matt Fry, PGA professional. If you enjoy what we do here and you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button down below, totally free to do, and hopefully it helps you enjoy and improve the game a little bit more. Let's go and debunk some myths about cavity backs and blades. So before we answer that question of blades versus cavity, I think there's three things that we need to understand to help us actually answer that. And the first one of those is the actual makeup of each of these golf clubs, the cavity and the blade, because they're very, very different. If we take the cavity iron, or the game improvement iron as I'm going to call it, for this JPX 925 HL model, there's a lot of aspects that the blade won't have there. And there's reasons for that. Firstly, when we look at it from behind, we can see the structure of it will look different to the blade. That is because it does have a bigger body. That is because it's trying to move weight around the perimeter of the golf club to help it be a more stable golf club on off-centered hits. It's also got a little bit more offset on this club, and again, that is an aid for the golfer who maybe doesn't hit their golf shots that straight and they're not too worried about shot shaping yet. They're more worried about trying to keep the ball as straight as possible. So we see from where the neck of the golf club actually meets the face of the golf club, there's quite a bit of offset there. The sole of the golf club, we can see it's got a wide sole, and again, this is an aspect which is designed to help the golfer. The wider the sole means that there can be more weight spread throughout that sole, which then in turn is going to help us launch the golf ball. Remember, these irons 925 HL are designed to do that. They want to get the golf ball up in the air. And if we looked at what the blade looked like in contrast, it looks very different. Now, take the back of the club. They look very clean. They look samurai sword-esque in their stylings, as opposed to where the cavity looks like there's a lot more going on. From behind, it looks like there's just two parts, a top and a bottom of the blade as you look at it. When you look at the sole of the blade, it's almost quarter the size of what the cavity is. Even when we look at the toe to heel length of the blade, it looks dramatically smaller than what the game improvement or the cavity iron does. And this is again a design aspect, because the player who's wanting to play the blade is actually more in the market for controllability. They're not looking for explosive distance. They're not looking for maximum forgiveness. They're looking for more control. They're looking for more workability. They've got the skills, let's say, to do what they want to do, or try to do what they want to do with the golf ball and achieve certain shots when hitting these irons. Now, the next thing that we have to look at when looking at both these clubs is distance. Distance has become a huge part of the game. And especially when you're starting out, distance is something that's going to be hard to achieve, because if you don't get a centered strike, you're not going to get the appropriate distance. And I think, and especially when I saw a lot of people that I was teaching that were starting out, if you're not seeing that ball sort of get up in the air and get some distance from it, it can be a little bit disheartening, and you think, well, I don't hit it anywhere, it's not doing what I want to. As soon as you saw one ball fly a good distance and look like a good shot, all of a sudden you felt a little bit better. So let's just see what the distance is between two 6 irons from the blade versus the game improvement cavity iron. I think the big thing, as soon as we start, before we even hit it, is actually what you see from behind the golf ball when you put it in. I talked about the looks and the makeup a moment ago. As you actually get the club into the golf ball now, having had them in hand and then placing it in, I feel, to me, the cavity looks a little bit bigger because I'm not starting, but straight away, I feel like I've got a lot of confidence because I can see that I've got a lot of club to aim for. And that is dramatically different when you put the blade in behind the golf ball. Everything about it just screams small. the thin top line, the compact toe to blade, the lack of offset. It looks a lot cleaner and almost inspires a little bit more of a want to hit this one for me as opposed to the cavity. But again, I'm not a beginner golfer. But let's see how this one fares when we look at distance. Now, after just a small selection of shots there, we can see a big difference straight away in how far the distance is going. Now, when we look at what the club was doing, they were swinging pretty similar, 1 mile per hour faster for the cavity back. I will caveat that by saying it is 1/4 inch longer, so I've got a slightly wider arc, which gives me a little bit more speed. Also, there's that ability knowing that, like I said as before I hit it, I've got a bigger head, so I know that I can get away with a little bit more. So maybe there's a sort of freedom in that golf swing because I know that it doesn't have to be absolutely centered to try and achieve the distance I want. But then if we look at what we see from the ball data, how far the ball's actually going, the big thing is the distance is drastic. It is drastically different. Now, there was one shot that I hit with the blades that I didn't actually think was that bad. It felt a little bit chunky and a little bit out the toe, and it dropped dramatically. And we see if I leave that in, it goes to 170 yards versus 182 yards for the cavity back. Now, if I take that shot out as my miss hit, I felt that I hit the cavity backs okay. Probably some similar shots in there, but I felt like I got away with a lot more. We see that they go 182 yards, so 12 to 8 yards difference when we're looking at those, and that's the difference between one club to maybe 1.5, 2 clubs when I'm going into the green. For that beginner golfer, when we go back to that question, the cavity back just felt so much easier to achieve distance and achieve that launch to get it up in the air. And the third thing that we've got to look at is that forgiveness factor. What am I actually going to achieve with the off-centered strike? Now, a lot of the argument that is, if you were to use a blade to learn with, because of the lack of forgiveness, because of the lack of the stability in the club head, because of the lack of size of club head, it would focus you more into the middle. But you're not really going to hit the middle that much if you're just learning to start to play golf, or even if you're a slightly higher handicapper golfer. Your sweet spot struck ratio, I would imagine, would be in the sort of 10 to 15%, as where if the pro who is using the blade, their sweet spot struck ratio would probably be in that sort of 80 to 85% range. So they're going to get away with a bit more. But let's see how that affects the ball flight. So what I'm going to do is spray the golf club face here with some dry shampoo. This is going to show me where I am striking the golf ball, and what I'm going to do, hopefully I've got the ability, I'm going to align the ball right out of the toe of the golf club and try and strike it from the toe each time, and I'll show you, just to show you where my strike is, to see how that affects our ball flight. We'll go cavity first and see what happens. Aligned right out of the toe and the grooves, try and strike it here. Oh, that didn't feel good. Oh, nearly missed it. But I've actually got a golf shot. Now it's time for the blade. I'm nervous about what's going to happen with the blade now we try this, because with the cavity, it felt like I was getting a little bit back. We can see that they were toe strikes. I could see that the ball was still launching and getting some distance that we'll find out shortly. But they also started out on line. I know that isn't going to be the case with the blade, but I just don't know how bad this is going to come out. If I get it right out of the toe, I'm also fearful it's going to hurt my hands a little bit. I'm going to get a little bit of shock, but we will soon find out. Even when I line it up the middle of the ball to the end of the grooves in the toe, the ball's actually hanging out over the end of the toe, as where it wasn't with the cavity. Oh, that one hurt. That one hurt. Yep. What a twist. awful. Now, before we look at the distance, a couple of other things just to bear in mind. The cavity back felt like there was more resistance to twist. A few of the shots that I hit with the blade, it literally felt like the club had spun in my hands and sort of laid and slid under the golf ball as I hit it. The cavity as well launched higher, looked more like a golf shot that was close to being a centre struck one, just didn't have the distance on it, but it still had the features or the sort of desired outcome of getting up in the air and going towards my target. It wasn't curving off. My dispersion felt a little bit wider with the blade. It was going offline a little bit more. It was shorter. It didn't launch as much, and the feedback was a bit more apparent. Which is maybe where the argument for using a blade to learn comes from, because if you don't hit that center, the feedback is going to let you know. A few of those shots, and you see me laughing at one of them, it felt just so bad. I knew that I hadn't got the middle. It felt like I'd almost missed the golf ball. As where with the cavity, it was hard to distinguish like a really flushed one versus a really toed one. They're not too far apart. Oh, nearly missed it. But I've actually got a golf shot. But when we look at the distance, it is dramatically different. 14 yards difference from the cavity to the blade. Now we see that that goes 154 versus 140. So, you know, again, 1 to 2 clubs difference, which is massive. But for me, when it comes to that forgiveness aspect, you know what's happened with the blade as soon as you do it, as well. You don't get as much feedback from the cavity back, which maybe if you're a beginner golfer and you're looking to start out, isn't too much of a bad thing. Because I think if we had too much negative feedback and we made it too hard, already a hard game, are we going to enjoy that as much? Is it going to be as inspiring, or are we going to be excited to carry on if we're seeing that the ball doesn't go as far as we want? It feels awful when we do it and it just seems hard, as where if I hit a shot and it seems to have gone okay and it's, yeah, maybe not as far as I want, but it looked all right, am I more likely to then want to go, well, how do I make this a little bit better? And I think that is where we can sort of draw a line in the argument for me. Is it the best thing to learn with blades versus the cavity back game improvement irons? I'm going to say no. As a golf coach, I wouldn't give someone a blade to start out with. I would always give them the most help that they could get in their hands to help them start to see some of those nicer ball flights, because I think the ball flight obviously tells us everything that we need to know about the golf swing and what's happening. And if I'm getting some positive feedback from that early on and it feels okay, I'm more likely to stay and actually want to improve that as I'm going on. If I'm getting a lack of good feeling, if I'm getting a lack of good visual from my ball flight, more than likely or not, it's going to put me off. So for me, should we use a blade over a cavity back game improvement iron? The answer is no. Let's stick with this game improvement iron and let's try and use these and work our way down to the player's irons. Become a player to use the player's irons is what I would say. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Just an interesting little insight to a myth that we always hear and talked about, a question that we always get asked. Have your comments down below for us. Have your say in what you think on that. And as always, do remember to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free to do. And we have loads of other things coming for you in the future. Thanks for watching. And why not check out one of our other videos just over here. See you there.